Hello, friends. This is Dave Hurwitz, executive editor at ClassicsToday.com. This is really exciting. This is a really good one. Well, they're all good ones. No, the music is really good. I may be terrible, but the music is always great. That's my solace. And today, we're going to talk about Janacek's string quartets. Wow, Janacek string quartets. There are not many string quartets that you just listen to and then say, wow. But the Janacek string quartets are two of them. And we're going to go through a big pile of CDs. I've got a lot of them, and I've kind of whittled them down because there have been so many recordings of them in the recent couple of decades. They used to be totally specialist repertoire. They really were. But recently, everyone's gotten a hold of them as Janacek has gained in popularity, and everyone does them, sometimes quite unhappily. And let's talk a little bit about why. First of all, they were both written around, the first couple decades, first 3 decades of the 20th century, between like 1919-ish, I think, and 1925, 26. They are extraordinarily passionate pieces. I mean passionate. I mean, let it all hang out there, hard on sleeve, hysterical emotion. That's what they are. It's really incredible how direct and totally unflinching their emotional temperature is. They are two of the most expressive pieces of music anybody ever dreamed of. The first, they both have subtitles. The first is the Kreutzer Sonata, based on Tolstoy's story, and it's about basically abuse of women is what it's about, and it's a piece of great sadness and tragedy. And the second is Intimate Letters, or Love Letters, which, it's almost embarrassing. It's so honest. It describes the love between Janacek and his 40-year younger paramour, Kamila Stoslova, who was completely uninterested in him, but he was in love with her. And he was obsessed with her, and he sent her love letters, and their contents are embodied in this quartet. And you can believe that they were some pretty hot letters, let me tell you. You don't have to read the bloody things to get a sense of what they said. They're really just remarkable pieces. And of course, they're in Janacek's ripest, most mature style. This style has no equivalent anywhere else in the world. His music is organized by what you might call the ostinato method. What happens is that, there's a melodic fragment, mostly based on the rhythms of Czech speech, which are interesting enough all by themselves, and then he sort of finds interesting ways to accompany that theme, usually by ostinatos in the other instruments going cha 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 like that. And at the same time, this little fragment of melody, it can be augmented, it can be diminished, all kinds of things happen to it. And out of this, he manages to create usually 4, 5, 6, 7 minutes of continuous music. How it all works is anybody's guess. Why it works is anybody's guess. But it totally holds together. They're just extraordinary improvisational pieces. And that's the key, I think, to a successful performance. Janacek's music always has to sound improvisational. It has to sound urgent. It has to have electricity running through it. It has to be rhythmic. It has to be passionate. It has to be vocal. It has to have vibrato, lots of vibrato. It's really amazing. I first heard these pieces, and I really couldn't believe that that this was chamber music, that these were string quartets. They sound so much like Janacek, like one guy, that you forget entirely the medium that he happens to be writing in. But the other interesting thing about them is that they exploit tremendously the coloristic possibilities of the quartet. There are lots of pizzicatos and ponticello, that raspy sound that you make playing close to the bridge. Incredibly high tessituras for all of the instruments. I mean, their range is extraordinary, and tremolos and things. They're very, very colorful. Harmonics, you name it. This guy uses it. But the interesting thing about that is that Czech quartets generally tend to do that. Dvorak's American Quartet is extremely colorful. I mean, his quartets have that coloristic aspect too, although not to the same degree as Janacek does. Even Kolovoda's quartets, which I talked about, their whole movements played pizzicato and with harmonics. And, that seems to be, I think, historically, there was something about it. Smetana's quartets too, his two quartets, are extraordinarily colorful in their writing for the strings. I'm not sure why this is true, but it seems to be a stylistic feature of string quartets in the Czech tradition. But Janacek carries this whole thing to an unprecedented degree. Now, I'm going to go through these recordings. We're going to talk about, they fall into certain categories, because really, the Czech quartets sort of own them, and really they still do. There are some other fine performances, and I'm going to talk about a couple of them, but basically, you're in business with the Czech quartets. Some of them are so-so, but most of them are just fabulous. And so let's, without further ado, I'm going to begin with two less successful performances that sort of explain everything that you can do wrong with them. Not that they're bad technically, they're just not in the same class as the best, and they're wrong idiomatically. Wrong idiomatically is the best way to describe, look, the Alban Berg Quartet. I mean, they're a great quartet. They're fabulous musicians, but they have none of the freedom, the flexibility, the spontaneous passion. Everything is technically well done, maybe a touch stiff rhythmically here or there, but it just doesn't sound right. I mean, if you know the Czech performances of these pieces, if you know what they can be, then hearing this, it's like, what went wrong? It just sounds like they don't understand where the music is going. However well polished, however finished the actual playing. And the same problem afflicted the Juilliard Quartet's performances too. Another group that is very, very technically polished, but they just didn't have the sound of the music, the rhythm of the music in their bones. And maybe they would have had they practiced more. I don't know. I really don't know. But they haven't lived with the music, and it's obvious the Alban Berg has not lived with the music. Equally unsatisfying, but for totally different reasons, the Lindsays, which used to be called the Lindsay Quartet before it became more trendy to call themselves the Lindsays. That was when string quartets were like the Beatles. They had to have catchy names, So the Lindsays. Now, what was the deal with the Lindsays? Here was the deal with the Lindsays. Initially, the Lindsays were a very, very exciting young quartet, and they were noted for risk-taking, really, for playing things, pedal to the metal, even Haydn, even early stuff like that. They really went for it. But gradually, over the years as they matured, if that's what you could call it, as a quartet, they became very, very just crude. I mean, there's no other word for it. I mean, crude. The great Czech string quartets could play with incredible passion and attack and energy, but they also had the most gorgeous tone and perfect intonation always. I mean, that was part of the school in which they were trained. A beautiful smoothness of timbre and blend. Not these guys. This is just noise. I mean, it's harsh. It's harsh and ugly and spontaneous, yes. Emotional, yes. But in a clueless kind of way. They really were unfortunate. But I kept them so I could tell you all about it, just like the Alban Berg. Now, one group that didn't get a lot of attention back in the day, but that really did a very good job, and it's another British group, was the Gabrielis. This was always on Decca. This was a cheap Decca. Remember back in the stereo treasury. Remember London stereo treasury those days, those cheap CDs. This was on it. I don't know quite what their affinity was for the music, but they play it very, very well, very convincingly. I mean, as a quartet, again, they have their ragged edges, but this is music that really can survive ragged edges because it's ragged edge music. I mean, it really works. And I think the Gabrielis do an excellent job with it. I really do. I still enjoy this. I had it on LP. I've had this thing for a billion years. And it really was, one of the few really fine versions, or I think convincing versions, by a non-Czech ensemble. So the Gabrieli Quartet is worth hearing, still is worth hearing. Also, as an example of really one of my favorite versions by a non-Czech quartet is this one with the Hagen Quartet on Deutsche Grammophon. This is kind of like the Lindsays, but with the right degree of technical finish, with really good intonation, with really good rhythm. They fling themselves at the music with as much passion as anybody could want, but they don't lose control. It doesn't fly completely over the edge. You know what I mean? It doesn't sound like it's being controlled. It just is. And that's what great quartet playing is, right? I mean, great playing of any instrument. You want to sound like you're improvising? Sound like you're improvising. But don't. You want to sound like you're throwing caution to the breeze? Throw caution to the breeze. But don't. You have to keep track of what you're doing. You have to be in command at all times. And they are. They simply are. It's a very, very exciting disc. Let me put this thing away. And then, and all the rest of the ones I'm going to talk about are Czech, even though there are fine other versions. I mean, there are. I know. You'll tell me. We know. But in terms of just overall command of the idiom, they don't stack up. Here's one, a Czech one that's just not so hot. It's this one, the Vlach Quartet of Prague on Naxos. It comes with the violin sonata and the fairy tale, the Pohádka, for cello and piano, which really is a considerable bonus because the two quartets are short. They only add up to about 42, 43 minutes of music on the whole, 44 sometimes. But these versions strike me as somewhat tepid, which is very, very surprising and not all that tonally alluring for a Czech ensemble. So not all of them are equally great. They aren't. But the rest of these, well, here's an oddity. I saw this sitting in my collection. It's actually pretty good. But, this is a local Czech release from Czech Radio with the Janacek Quartet. Everything about this is in Czech. It's totally Czech. This was not made for international distribution. The Janacek Quartet, the original Janacek Quartet, recorded these quartets for Supraphon. There's a Supraphon historical release that has those versions. They are superb. They are well worth hearing. I have it over in the main collection in Brooklyn. I don't have it here in the overflow room. So I'm telling you, you should hear the Janacek Quartet. They also did it for Deutsche Grammophon. They did the second quartet alone. So there are various versions of the Janacek Quartet floating around, including this digital remake with a substantially different personnel than the original Janacek Quartet. This is like from 1998. But if you want to get the original Janacek Quartet, it's on Supraphon, and it's absolutely wonderful and worth hearing. Extremely interesting and convincing in their way, but also somewhat confusing, is the Smetana Quartet. Now, the Smetana Quartet, this is sort of a thing here. Let me put this down carefully. The Smetana Quartet made these recordings for, earlier, and they were released in stereo on EMI. Here they are. They're on Testament now. And these Testament recordings, they were original EMI recordings, were very good, very straightforward, sort of Czech traditional performances. However, after these recordings were made, the Smetana Quartet was asked to do critical editions of both quartets, which they did. And as a result of that, their interpretation changed dramatically. And so by the time these digital ones came out, which are on Denon, they sounded like totally different works. In particular, the finale of the second quartet is taken at a blistering tempo, which not many people have followed, critical edition or no. So these Smetana Quartet performances are sui generis, more or less. And if you have them and you enjoy them, that's fine. I'm of two minds about them, to be honest. I recognize the mastery and the expertise of the group because the Smetana Quartet was one of the world's great quartets. It's a fabulous ensemble. But I think that the finale of the second quartet's a little too fast. I think maybe because this was their edition, they were anxious to make their points with it. You know what I mean? And the result, I think, is more almost about them and their edition than it is the immediate emotional expression of the music. Not that these are not fabulous performances. They are. I'm only giving you sort of my personal impression of them. The rest of these are 1, 2, 3, 4 of them are all fabulous. All of them. I mean, uniformly fabulous. And all of them are worth considering. First of all, the Czech Quartet, which was on Calliope. It's now probably on La Dolce Volta. I'm pretty sure. I mean, I'm not 100% sure. I didn't check recently because I have this one. And they are a great group. Now, the Czech Quartet was always sort of the upper crust Czech quartet. I mean, their playing was highly finished, highly polished, very sort of almost aristocratic in its finish, extremely musical, very, very sensitive. And it's that sensitivity that gets them through these pieces because they do not overly smooth out the rough edges. They are not excessively polished. They understand the music. They know what they have to do. And so they play it extraordinarily well. It's a wonderful version. Also wonderful is this new recording, or newish, by the Smetana Quartet on Supraphon. Young Czech group. The Young Czechs. And the Young Czechs, well, they have been superbly well trained, and they understand the music. It is in their blood, and they give these two absolutely, totally, fabulously convincing performances. They are exceptional, absolutely exceptional, and they're worth having. Also excellent, aside from the Skampa, and also on Supraphon, is the Pavel Haas Quartet. But the Haas Quartet's versions are on 2 CDs because they're coupled with other music, with like Smetana and Dvorak and stuff like that. And they do Janacek. So, they're broken up. And all of the discs I'm considering have both quartets on 1 CD. And this is just wonderful. Skampa Quartet on Supraphon, first rate. Also first rate, and this will come as no surprise, I am sure, the Panoka Quartet, which actually came out with different covers at one point or another. I have this twice. One has one cover, one has another, but it's the same stuff. It's the Panoka Quartet. They are, of course, one of the great quartets ever. Their box of Dvorak quartets is the definitive, so far, cycle of Dvorak quartets, and their Janacek is equally convincing. And I'm going to play you a couple samples of it because it's so much fun, isn't it? I'm just going to talk to you about 2 moments that I listen for, and that I would suggest you listen for in seeing if, the quartet has really got the music going the way it's supposed to be going. One of them is the very end of the first quartet. At the end of the first quartet, there's this urgent sort of gallop to the finish in dotted rhythm, bum, ba-dum, 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 ba-dum. It's a real gallop. And the theme of the very opening of the quartet returns, and it's answered by just this passionate outpouring of violin sonority. And they really have to just fling themselves at it. They really do. It has to sound totally, completely unrehearsed, passionately spontaneous, and even a little bit desperate, because of course it's going to end very sadly. Here is that moment as the Panoka Quartet plays it. Okay, that's the end of the first quartet. The other moment I always listen for is towards the 2/3 of the way through the third movement of the second quartet. Now, the third movement of the second quartet has this beautiful middle section, this gentle theme. Da 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 da, ba dum bum bum bum, da da da. I'm not going to say it. Yeah. I shouldn't do that. Anyway, then there's a pause, and it comes back in the highest register of the violin, fortissimo. I mean, it's a scream. It's really a violin scream, and it's like it should go through your head like a knitting needle. It's just unbelievably intense. Now, there are two ways to do that generally. One is to absolutely make it a scream. I mean, it's raw and like you're killing something. The other way is to try and preserve your intonation a little better and focus the tone. It's equally piercing and equally alarming. That's the way the Pinocchos do it. You may prefer the other. Sometimes I do, sometimes I don't. But it's beautifully, beautifully done. And just as important is the accompaniment. One of the things that non-Czech quartets kind of mess up is that they make the accompanying figure, which is like this seething mass of sound underneath the screaming violin. They make it too rhythmically choppy. It sounds like they're counting. And it should never, ever sound like they're counting. It should sound like a roiling, seething mass of sound underneath the screaming violin. And the Pinocchos get that. They nail that. You understand that there's this moving, sort of boiling emotional temperature underneath it all. But it has to boil. And it can't sound like it's coming out in staggered rhythmic figures. Bad. Anyway, the final version. I mean, I've really listened to, I think, as many possible versions of this music as I could because I love it so much. However, if I had to choose one that combines all of the best qualities, the Czech tradition, the polish, the intensity, the spontaneity, that touch of rawness that the music needs every so often, I can't think of a version that does it better than the Project Quartet on Praga. These were recorded in 1997. They are absolutely magnificent. Smoking hot, unbelievably intense, brilliantly played, just a tremendous musical experience. They really are. And if they're still around, if you can find them, if you can hear them, I really recommend very, very strongly that you do so. You also get on this disc the violin sonata, the marvelous violin sonata, which is absolutely terrific, which has as one of its themes the sleigh bell departure music from Katya Kabanova. It's related to the opera Katya Kabanova or Kaba something, whatever it's called. Anyway, Project Quartet for the Janacek quartets. I mean, I just think this is really special. Really, really special performance. But any of these Czech performances from the Janacek quartet on down that I've talked about will do you very, very well. And I am not really, I don't believe that it's always true that native musicians do the music best. I really don't. I don't, it's a question of musicality. It's a question of expertise and practice and sympathy and all of those qualities. And I have no doubt. I mean, the Hagen quartet is a case in point. I mean, they play as well as any of the Czech quartets, and they have just as much passion and intensity. I think it's really, really marvelous what they do. But generally speaking, in these two works, I think that they have been the pride of the Czech quartet literature, and these native groups simply play them with incredibly idiomatic and convincing expressive point. I think that's all there is to be said for it. Nonetheless, that is no excuse not to keep on listening, because even though there are only like 40 minutes of music and there are only two Janacek quartets, out of all the quartets, I mean, really, of all the quartets in the quartet literature, there are no two quartets that are are more subject to wide-ranging interpretive ideas, to extremes of dynamics, extremes of tempo, extremes of phrasing and rhythm. And I mean, there is so much you can do with this music. There are so many different ways it can sound. And even in these Czech performances, the range from one performance to the next, I mean, sometimes it's just amazing. And just as the Smetana Quartet example, illustrates, there are many, many different approaches to the quartets, all of which are successful. And that means that even though, you may think you have the version or maybe the top 20 versions, there's always going to be room for 21, because the music is so spontaneous that you never know what's going to happen. I mean, it's reflected in the performances, and you never know what revelation might lie in wait when the next group gets its hands on them. So with that in mind, keep on listening. Thank you so much for joining me with this. I hope you truly enjoy the Janacek quartets and come to love them as much as I do. They are marvels, truly marvels. Take care.